morning to you. The Daybreak Show rolls on here on a Friday morning. Good morning, Spencer.
Good morning.
It's going to be a nice day. Warm today, mid-80s. Mason County Auditor Patty McGuire back from the Ukraine, where it's super hot over there right now as well. I've seen some images of Paris, and it just looked like it's a scorcher in the mid-30s, 40s centigrade, so, it's super hot. But good morning, sir.
Good morning. Yeah, when I was coming back through Frankfurt, changing planes in Frankfurt on the way home, it was 102 in Frankfurt.
Oh,
so.
wow. Yeah. You don't really think about that too much, to be a temperature like that in Frankfurt.
And they're not very prepared for it.
No?
I can say from walking through the airport, their air conditioning was left a little bit to be desired.
So you were in the Ukraine most recently here as part of a delegation that was handpicked across the country to go kind of talk a little bit about and monitor their elections and election security. Is that right?
Absolutely. So I was part of the U.S. delegation to an observer mission from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is 57 countries are members of this, including the U.S. and Canada. The Canadian delegation was actually the largest. There were 150 Canadians in the delegation. There's a big Ukrainian population in Canada, so they have a special interest in that. But there were 110 Americans picked by the U.S. State Department to be part of this international delegation, and I was one of those 110.
That's pretty exciting and very cool. Kiev, is that the capital of the Ukraine?
That is the capital. I saw the Parliament building, and it's a big city and has a lot of very high-end. It's a fascinating place because there's both sort of very old, tired Soviet architecture, a lot of people living in really old, crummy buildings that were ugly when they were brand new, Soviet-style apartments, but then luxury condos and a Cartier store, and so a contrast between a whole lot of money and then a whole lot of people living not very well.
The Ukraine is a pretty large country south of Belarus and to the east of Romania, south of Poland there, and next to Russia, with Odessa on the border, on the edge of the Black Sea, is kind of we're putting our eyes on the map right there. So you spent most of your time in Kiev to do this, or?
So we spent 2 days in Kiev with, all the observers there. They did 2 days of training, and then I was shipped out, part of 20 of us that went to a province called Sumy, S-U-M-Y, which is right up hard against the Russian border in northeast Ukraine, where for World War II buffs, the Battle of Kursk took place, the largest tank battle in the history of the world, took place right there, and their blown-up tanks still rusting away.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's a big agricultural region. It looks an awful lot like Kansas or Iowa, rolling fields, beautiful black soil, and fields of mostly corn and wheat and soybeans, and sunflowers, lots and lots of sunflowers for sunflower oil.
Fascinating.
So very pretty country.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, before we get into kind of the elections of this, let's again remind folks county didn't pay for any of this.
County didn't pay for this. They did pay my salary while I was there, but all the expenses are paid by the U.S. State Department. Okay. Yeah, I have a $100 a year travel budget.
Yeah, so they're going to get you to...
I saw you holding bake sales outside for this thing.
Help me get to the Ukraine.
Yeah, not very far.
So,
I couldn't get to SeaTac on that.
Talk to me a little bit about elections in Ukraine. Of course, we've had lots of conversations here in America about Russian interference, and you can't really get any closer to Russia than where you were in that Sumy region next to it. Are they concerned about this? Is this something that you were talked about and had to look into, or were you more kind of invested in the overall ways that the citizenry cast ballots and then what happens to the ballots after that?
So my job was very local. We had a district, so there are 225 parliamentary districts, like a congressional district here. myself and a woman from the Czech Republic were looking at things in one of those districts, and in downtown Sumy. And so we were in polling places. We were making sure that the process of distributing ballots, make the mechanical process of the election, those processes were working right and being run fairly, and that polling places were opening on time.
Okay.
That, they were treating everybody the same, that they weren't favoring one party over another, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So, the people looking at election interference and cyber stuff and those sort of things, that was sort of at a completely different level than we were operating on. This was, very much all politics is local.
Yeah.
The mechanics of what was happening in polling places.
I've never experienced voting in any other country, but what observations did you make in terms of similarities to our system or things that might have struck you as completely different?
So the process was completely different. So every voter got 2 ballots. So this was a parliamentary election. They had a new president. They had a new president elected a couple months ago. He disbanded Parliament. These were parliamentary elections. Half of their parliament is elected by party on a proportional vote. So you go in and there were 22 parties listed, and you voted for one of those 22 parties, and half the parliament is split up based on the percentage of that vote. The other 225 members are elected from single districts. So Sumy got 1 member, and people voted for one person of 17 candidates there, and the one who came in first got elected. So 2 ballots dropped in the ballot box. And from a mechanical standpoint, it was fascinating because they pull the ballots out of the ballot boxes, these clear plastic ballot boxes, and they pull the ballots out and sort them, the party ballot and the candidate ballot, and then they hold them up. There's a 17-member precinct electoral commission. They hold up the ballot and announce what's on the ballot and argue about it if they need to. And then they say the name of the party, and then they pass them out and then count them up by hand. And that's how it happens. It is slow as can be. And the polling place where we were to close the night and watch the counting, it had to be 95 degrees in there, not a breath of air.
Wow. What did that do for turnout? Was there,
slightly over half. It was a little lower than they had hoped. But this is also the third national election they've had in 6 months. And so they're sort of getting to voter fatigue too. But 17 people locked in a room it took almost 12 hours to count all the ballots one by one.
Any technology? Do they have any technology like what we have?
Absolutely not. Zero technology. And in fact, they produce to record the vote totals. They produce what they call a protocol, which is a printed book, but they have to handwrite the vote counts for all the parties. They have to handwrite in the names of the parties and the names of the candidates because they weren't even pre-printed with that information. Wow. Handwrite all that in, have all 17 members. They had to make 20 of those handwritten records, and 17 committee members all had to sign all 20 records. It is the opposite of technology. And people who talk about hand counting ballots here in this country, no, we don't want to do that.
We'll get the results in about 25 years.
Sure. So is this the election, the results from this election that you witnessed are the ones who will be going into Parliament, or is this a primary, kind of what we're doing with currently?
This is the one and only election. So they're presidential elections. They elected a new president 3 months ago. That was a 2-round affair. There were 20-something candidates in the first round, and then the top 2, which would be similar to what we experience here, the top 2 went forward. Interestingly, of the top two, the new president won something like 77% of the vote in the top two, so it was not close. And then his party, which is a brand new political party, and just so the new president was an actor on a sitcom called Servant of the People about a government employee. His party is called Servant of the People. Brand new party. They're now in the majority in Parliament, and not a single person in the parliamentary majority has ever been in the Parliament before. So they have about 260, 270 new parliamentarians who are going to be running things, but nobody has ever been in Parliament before.
What are the limits on their, how long would this new president be in that office for?
It's a 5-year term.
5-year term. Wow. And then one thing I've read about other countries and how their elections go is there's not the long drawn-out process like for the presidential here, we're already having debates and we're a year and a half out. Is it a shortened kind of election cycle there as well?
This was extremely short because normally the term for Parliament would have ended in October and there would have been parliamentary elections in October. The president somehow, and I don't quite understand the mechanics, dissolved the Parliament and called for early elections. So it was about 6 weeks ago that they decided and scheduled these elections. So it happened very fast. And one of the issues was that physically getting ballots distributed out to this big country, getting them printed and done, was an issue in a few places. It wasn't where we were, but it was an issue in other places that there weren't printed ballots in polling places.
Are there? I know it's elections are sacred here in the country, our country, and in the state, and obviously you probably couldn't make any super wholesale changes. But are there things that you learned there that you could maybe take to to Secretary of State Wyman about something about here's what we saw over there that may or may not work here? Or do they, when you talk to them about things we do here, do they have any interest in adopting some of the ways that we do elections?
Yeah, I would say the latter. I mean, I talked to several people in the District Electoral Commission about vote by mail, and that was sort of not something that they had ever even heard of, and it was intriguing to them because they have all these mechanical processes, and Ukraine is a country where they have apparently a pretty good postal system, which is not always the case in the outside the Western world, but
sure.
They do manage to do mail there, and so people were pretty curious to hear about that, and they never really heard about that. I don't think there are any practices that I saw from Ukraine that I necessarily want to bring here.
Do you know what the voter turnout? I mean, you said there was 3 elections in the last couple months. Do you know what the turnout was the first election?
It was something, if I'm remembering correctly, just below 70, 60, and then this was about 50.
So 70%. What do you think that gets that big of a turnout? Is it because it was the presidential? I guess that's somewhat similar to our
we manage that. We manage that here in Washington State. It certainly isn't nationwide.
Right.
I mean, we're and there, every adult is registered to vote. So there is not a registration process where 30% or whatever in this country opt out and decide not to be registered and not participate. Everybody there, by virtue of citizenship, is a registered voter, and being a former Soviet state, they're pretty good at keeping track of who their citizens are, and they have lists, and they're good at that too.
We know you're busy, so we voted for you.
Yeah, we took care of that for you.
What's like the voter confidence like there? It's got to be somewhat confusing for people with all these elections, and like you said, just this whole new experience with the president and the parliament not having really any experience in it. But I wonder what that would be like. Like here, we know that confidence isn't all that high in Congress and things like that. How is it there? Do people have faith that their vote means anything? Or
I think so. I mean, it was hard. It was hard to talk to voters a lot just because of the language barriers.
Sure.
But talking to election officials who really are, I mean, the precinct election officials are not professionals. They have regular jobs and they do this on a volunteer basis. And so there's a lot of optimism there that they are coming out of a long series of corrupt governments, and that the new president, President Zelensky, is on the right track and ran on an anti-corruption and pro-Europe platform. That's the sort of big political divide in Ukraine, is whether they're going to face Russia or face Europe. Mm-hmm. And Zelensky is very much pro-Europe, and I think people want to be part of the West. And I mean, he got 70-something% of the vote with a pro-European platform. And so, I think people are quite optimistic that they have good elections. And what I saw was very positive, and not every rule followed perfectly, but the mistakes I saw, I thought were fair and honest mistakes, and pro-voter mistakes. So, without getting too far in the weeds, the physical ballot has what they call a counterfoil. So the bottom piece of the ballot had to be signed by the voter, and it was supposed to be torn off and kept by the election worker, and then the voter takes the ballot into the ballot box, fills it out, and drops it in the box. And if there's a ballot in the ballot box with the counterfoil attached, it's supposed to be thrown out because the voter's name is on there and it can be identified. In the precinct we were in, there were 4 ballots that came out of the ballot box with the counterfoil attached. Well, that's not a mistake that the voter made. That's a mistake that the election worker made. And what they did, contrary to the law, was tear off the counterfoil and put it in the box to be counted to match with the number of ballots, and counted the ballot. And they didn't do that looking at who the voter voted for. It was, they just did it automatically. And it was wrong, and it was against the rules, but it was kind of the right thing to do. I mean, it's a lousy rule as far as I'm concerned. As an election official, disqualifying a voter because I made a mistake doesn't ever feel like the right thing to do. And so, I mean, that part was really interesting to me.
We're just about out of time, but I'd be remiss to mention that primary elections are happening now in Mason County, and people have their ballots in hand and hopefully get those back here before too long at some of the ballot drop boxes. And you see now some of the changes that have been made, the postage paid on your envelopes to drop those in, and they are due August 2nd.
August.
Boy, we should have checked.
Where's the calendar?
I sent mine to the Ukraine. Is that bad?
I've been gone.
It's the first.
July 21st is the Ukrainian deadline.
the first Tuesday in August, right? So that's August 6th by 8 o'clock on that one. Patty McGuire, Mason County Auditor. Good to see you. Good conversation.
Nice to see you.
That was fascinating.